Hi, this is Stephen and Jen with Iowa Backyard Farmer, and today we're going to talk about picking the tomatoes you want to plant in your garden. How do you decide what to grow and what's going to do what you want it to do in your garden? There's so many choices of seeds out there. How do you decide?
Yeah, so that's a very common question. They'll look through the catalogs and say there's so much, it's kind of confusing. How do I know which ones to choose? And so we'll talk through some of the principles today on how to choose the right tomato for you.
First thing you're going to want to decide is, what is your end use? Are you using it for canning? Do you want it to go on hamburgers? Do you want little cherry tomatoes to dry? Figure that out. And we've sort of got them classified in on our plant sale list as, you know, you can buy little ones or slightly bigger ones or paste tomatoes. So let's start with the paste tomatoes today. That's an area everybody's like, I want to make salsa or I want to can. Paste tomatoes is where it's at. But even in paste tomatoes, there's a lot of variety. So how do I know which one's right?
Yeah, so as you determine which ones you want to consider, we of course sell about 10 different paste tomatoes.
There are hundreds.
There are hundreds available. We've gone through and tried to select those that are best for our area. But one of the first things you want to consider is the plant growth habit. And so,
what does that mean?
You know, what does that mean? There's really two, or I'll say kind of 2.5 types. There's indeterminate and determinate, and then a semi-determinate, which is kind of halfway in between.
That's very nice, fancy vocabulary. I don't understand.
That's so an indeterminate would be a plant growth that the plant gets really big. It requires staking or some kind of support, and it will fruit, give you tomatoes clear until the plant dies, usually at frost time.
It keeps growing until the frost kills it, and
Yeah.
it will get taller. If you were going to grow them in a greenhouse and do a greenhouse hothouse tomato, you could grow those vines for a couple of years. They will just keep growing. They'll grow 30 feet long until the frost gets them in our garden. They won't go quite that long in your garden.
Yeah, so in our garden they'll typically grow 6 or 7, sometimes 8 or 9 feet. A determinate is a plant that has a determined number of, what would you call it?
It's a determined growth habit, and so it's going to get to a certain size, it's going to start setting fruit, it's going to set a whole bunch of fruit, and it's going to be done after that point. It's not going to put on new branches, it's not going to keep putting out new fruit. It has kind of an arc. It's going to go up and do a whole bunch, and then it's done, and you'll probably be done before frost.
Yeah, typically you'll get a decent harvest for around 3 weeks, and then after that it's time to pull it up and plant something else in that
If
spot.
you want a whole bunch of something all at once, determinants are the way to go, because if nothing is more irritating than I picked a tomato today and a tomato tomorrow, and I'm trying to make salsa and I don't have enough tomatoes all at once. Determinants can really help you with that.
Yeah, so number one, if you're going to can and you want a whole bunch in a short time period, pick a determinate. If you want a bunch over a long period of time, or not quite as many, but a much longer harvest, then you'd go with an indeterminate type of plant. The next thing...
And semi-determinate, you didn't explain semi-determinate. They're wild, crazy things. So the standard Roma, so everybody comes and they're like, well, I need a Roma tomato. Give me a Roma. The original Roma tomato is a semi-determinate. It's only a couple ounces. It's kind of a small tomato, but it is a very vigorous plant, and it grows bigger than a determinate, but it does not want to go straight up like an indeterminate. So I have trouble with it on my trellises because it goes bleh.
Yeah, so in terms of height, the determinate, you're around 3 feet is what to expect for those. Well, an indeterminate can go on for 6, 8, 10 feet or even longer.
Whatever it feels like.
The semi-determinate will grow about 5 or 6 feet. So it certainly gets bigger than the determinate. It produces a pretty big wave at the beginning and then just kind of trails off, but it will keep producing, although not near as much, clear until frost time.
And a regular Roma is a good example of that. We'll probably put up on the screen here our chart, but the Roma is just a little one among many. It's actually a category. So people say, I want a Roma, and I'm going to say, what kind? Which is our next question, right? Because Roma is not just, it's sort of like Kleenex is to tissue, right? Everybody's like, I want a Kleenex. Well, you just need something to blow your nose in, right? So a Roma tomato can be that original Roma VF, but it's the smaller one. Or it could be any of these newer varieties. Let's talk about some of those. So like Early Resilience, Gladiator, Plum Regal, Paisano, San Marzano is not actually aroma, but it's kind of, it's in that category.
It's in the category.
They're all plum-shaped tomatoes. They're really meaty. They don't have a lot of seeds. They have a small core. They're good for processing.
Yep, and these come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, ranging from that Roma VF that Jennifer mentioned at about 2 ounces, all the way up to, we have some like super sauce that are much bigger, pushing close to a pound. The Determinates, which produce during that fairly short time period, those are all about the same size. You can pick and choose any of the different varieties. They're all about the same size. They're bred for different purposes and have different strengths.
So, well, and that makes a good point, because some people are always like, I'd like a tomato, but I need an heirloom tomato. Why do people feel like they need an heirloom tomato all the time?
A lot of people have the perception that heirloom tomatoes are always going to taste better. And while there is some truth to that, there was a long period of breeding where the focus was on products that could store better, they could be shipped better, and there wasn't near the focus on flavor. More recently, that focus has switched back, where there is a focus on keeping the heirloom flavor while still giving the performance, the yields, and the disease resistance of the newer hybrid varieties. So
it's sort of like if I only wanted to wear clothes from the 1920s, would they look okay? Yes. Are they fabulous? Yes. Am I grateful for polyester and some cotton poly blends? You bet I am. So, there are some good things that happen in genetics that are current, more recent developments, and I would encourage you to not be scared off by those just because they're not some heirloom thing. If the caveat to heirloom that a lot of times goes together is that if you want to save seeds, you're going to need an open pollinated variety. I've been gardening for my whole entire life, and I only very recently started saving seeds. So don't feel pressure. You can hybrids are fine. There are some really good hybrids. If you're worried about genetics in tomatoes and things like that, it is a small worry. It is a small worry, and there's some great new things out there, and tomato breeders doing some really awesome things.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that covers the Roma or the paste type of tomatoes.
Well, what's your favorite this year?
What's my favorite?
He works on our list. He does all the research.
It's hard to choose. That's why we've got so many. But really, we look for a good portfolio of tomatoes. I would not want to plant 20 of just one kind unless I was a professional farmer and doing all the stuff a professional farmer does. I would encourage you, if you are going to plant 5 or 10 or 20 tomatoes, to choose from 4 or 5 different types.
So what is the criteria? When you're looking at a seed catalog and you're looking to buy a tomato, what are the phrases that you're looking for that say this tomato will probably do well?
Well, I like to have the full collection, so we do have some heirlooms for those people who want the heirlooms.
Because some of them are irreplaceable, and there's not enough people working on this to keep all the great stuff in there. So if there's something really great, we keep it around.
Yeah, another thing I look for is the days to maturity. A lot of the heirlooms have a longer days to maturity than some of the newer hybrids.
That means there's a delay between when I plant it and when I get to eat it.
Yeah, so yeah. If you see a product or a variety that has 70 days to maturity, and you look at one right next to it that's 85 days to maturity, there's going to be about a 2-week difference between when you get the first red tomato off of one plant versus the first red tomato off the other.
And this is a big deal. This is a big deal because I mean, tomatoes are our big seller. If people are planning a garden and they're like, what are you growing? Everybody's growing a tomato. Everybody can't wait for that first juicy ripe tomato. Guess when we get them?
We can get them a lot sooner.
We can get them a lot sooner if you plan right. So my goal to get a nice fresh tomato is the 4th of July, which is a challenge here in central Iowa, but we have done it consistently over the years. And having a maturity date that is not 100 days really helps. It really helps to shorten that up.
Yeah, and we get busy in the fall. We really try to do the bulk of our gardening in the summer before school gets going again, because once school gets going, it's a lot harder for us to get out in the garden. And so that 2-week, earlier period to get a first harvest can make the difference between getting a good harvest versus something either this last year getting blown down by the derecho or disease coming in and taking something out, or if we go on vacation and something happens to our watering. That extra week to 2 weeks makes a big difference for us, and does for a lot of people.
All right, so we're going to look for days to harvest, That's a good one. If you want an earlier tomato, pick a shorter time. You're looking for hybrid versus heirloom, and don't be scared. Pick something that works. I would also add that we would look for some disease resistance. Here in central Iowa, we get some plant diseases, we get some early blight, we get some late blight, we get some other stuff. What are they looking for? Like it says Roma VF. What are we finding when they say Roma VF?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different tomato diseases, and a lot of the plants are resistant to certain types, but not to everything. One of the more common diseases that we find here in central Iowa is septoria, which is a fungal disease that there is no tomato with resistance to that. But if you have early blight issues or late blight issues,
you're going to be more susceptible to septoria.
There are a number of varieties that are resistant to those. So we can look through, and if you know what your problems are, pretty easily narrow down to the varieties that'll work best for you.
And there are some tomatoes out there with really great things. You'll see it has a V and an F and an F and a V and this whole alphabet behind it. It says somebody has tested this thing and it's going to resist good diseases. And if you've had trouble in the past, that's a good thing to look for. Okay, let's try another kind of tomato. What do you want to talk about?
So let's look at our really big tomatoes. It's pretty common. We'll have somebody that'll stop by and say, I just want a big red tomato. And
they're delicious.
And they're delicious, and ask some of the same types of questions. But one of the things that I'll note that is different is if you want a really big red tomato and a determinate type of plant, they don't exist. We don't have any. There's not any good ones on the market.
You can take some shortcuts if you've got a smaller garden or you're growing in pots with some of our smaller tomatoes and make it work. But you cannot really make a humongous tomato work unless you are growing in like a half of a barrel.
Yeah, like
really.
A barrel.
Like a big pot. A big pot. They're going to take a lot of sun and they're going to take a longer season.
Yeah, so all of the same thing applies. All the same principles apply. In terms of open pollinated or hybrid, there are a lot of really good varieties. A lot of the classics that people talk about ask for by name.
And this would be a good example. So I'm going to come to you and I say I want a Brandywine. What are you going to tell me?
So there's a Brandywine variety. There's also the Brandywine class, and we can talk about each of those. We do carry the Brandywine variety. It's an older one.
And there are different strains of this. So we picked the best strain that we could of this Brandywine variety.
Yeah. So the one that we have dates back to 1885. It's called the Kiesenberry strain, and it's noted to be one of the best. And Brandywine certainly has a following, super delicious flavor, but it takes a long time. It's about our latest maturing tomato that
it's over 80 days, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a really good parent plant. So if you're looking at plant genetics and you're looking at all this whole list, how many of these on here actually have a parent that's in the Brandywine? That's a Brandywine. So like Mountain Rouge, I think, is a new one we started. And you might not be familiar with that name, but guess what? It's related to Brandywine.
Yep, so that is there have been several varieties that have been created and marketed that are descendants of Brandywine. Mountain Rouge is one of the most recent ones. Its focus was really on having a product that was earlier. So they shaved about a week off of that days to harvest.
And they got a smaller core.
Much smaller core, which is nice. So you can have a lot more tomato that you can eat without having to cut out a great big chunk of it right out of the center. But they've also brought quite a bit more disease resistance as well. Kept the flavor, but improved it in a lot of the other ways.
And with those big tomatoes, nothing is as heartbreaking as having this perfect, huge tomato growing on your vine and having it split or fall apart. It's tragic. It's tragic. So I'm like, let's figure out some of these things. If it says resists cracking, that's a good thing in my book.
Yeah. So a lot of the same things still apply here. Look for the size that you want. Look for I'll just point out one difference that maybe a lot of people don't recognize is that some of these big, what we call big red tomatoes, some are pink, some are red. Most of the heirloom ones are technically classified as a pink tomato.
They're fabulous flavor.
And
you should not be scared.
Really really good. The pink tomatoes in general have a sweeter flavor than the darker red tomatoes do.
They do. They do. I really like them. Okay, let's talk about the not red tomatoes, because we have some of those too.
Yeah, so when we first started, we had only planted red tomatoes and thought that's all there really was to know. And then somewhere along the line, we tried an orange tomato and thought, oh my goodness, these are so good.
They're missing out. So don't tell anyone, orange tomatoes are actually my very favorite. And we grow a lot of them, and I was really sad that we lost them all last year. We had a problem last year. But we've got a lot of orange tomatoes because they're so good. And they range the same thing. There's some hybrid, there's some open pollinated varieties. One of my favorites was an Amana orange, and we're not carrying that one this year, even though it was one of my very favorites. How come?
Yeah, so Amana orange, super delicious, but I remember that we could only eat those after the kids had gone back to school because it took so long for it to mature. And then a breeder focused on improving that one and brought a new variety called Chef's Choice Orange that is I'd say at least a week and a half earlier than the old Amana orange was, kept the same flavor, brought some additional disease resistance, brings all the stuff that we wanted, and
is it an AAS winner? I think that one's an AAS winner.
Yeah, so that's a 2014 AAS winner.
And so, again, some really good stuff. Tell me about like Orange Wellington or Dr. Wychee.
So Dr. Wychee, so I'll cover a couple here. Dr. Wychee and Kellogg's Breakfast are some heirlooms that have been around for a lot of years, have some wonderful stories to them. Super delicious, super sweet flavor. They're really, really good. They're more the beefsteak type where you've got the big rumpled shoulders on them. Kind of a little bit bigger core than maybe some of the other ones, but super
fantastic
delicious.
Fish salsa. I just eat it, just eat it right there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and while we don't sell as many orange tomatoes as we do red tomatoes, people come back again for them every year. Everybody that has tried one seems to want to come back and say, I need at least one or two orange tomatoes every year. They fill a very specific purpose. They're really delicious, a little brighter, kind of nice to add those into your salsa.
It does. It adds some. You put some red, some yellow, some green in there. It's very colorful. All right, let's round it back out and talk about our little ones. There's the little cherry tomatoes and the small ones. What's the difference between a grape tomato, a cherry tomato, a cocktail tomato? All these little, we've got little bullet-shaped ones, we've got little round ones, we've got little oval ones. Tell me about this.
Yeah, really it comes down to size and shape and somewhat the flavor as well. So cherry tomatoes are going to be the smallest that we carry. You can also get currant tomatoes, which are even smaller. We've
grew
grown
on
those
last year and kept them. They were super cute. They're not practical.
They're not. Yeah, they're cute. They're kind of fun to snack on, but not super practical. And so we've really focused on the cherry tomato as our smallest ones, and we have several, but two big red ones that are big name that people come back for year after year. Chadwick Cherry is a great heirloom. Super Sweet 100 is another fantastic, really sweet, really delicious, really high in vitamin C variety. From there, though, we've got some others that are maybe a little more fun type with.
And I have a thing for stripes and for colors, and it's just fun. So Sunrise Bumblebee is one of my favorites. It's a yellow with pink stripes. It goes all the way through. I just slice them and eat them in a bowl. And
those hardly ever make it into the house, to be honest. We eat those out in the garden before I even come in, and they're really good.
And
really
sun
delicious.
sugar too. We call those garden candy. Sun sugar is an orange one, and it is so sweet. And it's almost the first one to get ripe every year. We grow 50 plus tomatoes, all these different things. Sun sugar is always first out of the gate. It's ready to go, and it goes for a long time. Who was the winner last year?
So this last year, I was surprised. Throughout the season, I loved Sun Sugar. I loved Sunrise Bumblebee. But we got to the end of the year, and I thought everything was done. I hadn't pulled everything up, but we'd left all of the cherries out and didn't water it for about 2 weeks. And went out one day thinking it's time to pull these up, get the plants out of the garden, get the garden cleaned up. And here in the middle of October, having not been watered for quite some time, was the Sparky XSL. And that's a new variety that we had basically just wanted to trial in our garden. Sold a few other plants to others as well.
It's one of those, is it one of the artisan class where they're keeping all that fabulous flavor and all that stuff, but it's with the new genetics, and it really paid off because you went out there and it was the last one standing. It was the only one that made it through everything that the whole year threw at it last year.
And so it's really sweet. It has a good flavor, but it didn't really stand out to me as being something super fantastic until we got to the end of the year, and they were still pumping out really big, really delicious, really just fabulous cherry tomatoes. So that made it on our list again this year, and I'm super excited to let others to try that one as well.
So what's the difference between cherry and grape tomatoes then?
Grape tomatoes are just a little bit bigger and a little bit longer, kind of grape shaped is how I like to look at them.
Or bullet shaped in the case of some of them. Blush and Prairie Fire, they're both little torpedoes. They're kind of fun.
So some that are just a little bit longer. We just have a variety of different grape tomatoes. We have a couple of red ones, a smaller one that's a Napa grape, one that's a little bit longer of a red one, that's Juliet. Juliet is also an AAS winner. I've been around for about 20 years. Is a really good standard grape tomato that a lot of people really like.
Do you know what I really liked last year? I liked Apricot Zebra, which was a new one. It's again in that artisan class. It's got stripes, has a really good tomatoey flavor, and I didn't think that was going to stand out again, but it makes the most fabulous sun-dried tomatoes. We dried, I don't even know how many of them. It was very productive.
Yeah, so that's another one. It's a brand new one, but really delicious, and for us, we really like that one dried.
And Brad's Atomic Grape is just, you can't beat that for the kaleidoscope of colors that's in that. That's kind of fun.
It's a relatively new one, but it recently won a National Heirloom Expo award. So to get an heirloom award for a fairly new variety is pretty unique.
It's pretty cool. And Blush I really like too. That's like Sunrise Bumblebee, only bullet shaped. It's kind of fun to eat. So what about if I want, we talked about yellow tomatoes, we talked about red tomatoes, we talked about all these things, but we didn't talk about my green and black and blue tomatoes. Let's talk about those.
Green and black and blue. So this last year we tried a green tomato, and I had thought this is going to be really strange. I'm used to waiting till tomatoes are all ripe, and we tried this green tomato, and I'm trying to find my list here.
Evergreen, Emerald Evergreen is the name of that one.
Emerald Evergreen, and I'm not going to find it, looks like. So Emerald Evergreen, it ended up being about the sweetest tomato I think I'd ever tasted. You have to watch it to make sure that you harvest it when it's ripe, because it doesn't turn a different color, other than a little bit more of a yellowish.
It gets softer.
But it gets a little bit softer, so you have to determine when to harvest it through touch. And that was delicious. I highly recommend, if you've only tasted a red tomato before, try something else as well.
That one's worth a shot. Paul Robeson, we have Purple Cherokee, Black Crim, all those are pretty standard. They're all heirloom.
Those are heirlooms that people ask for every year.
So there's lots of good choices out there. I hope this helps you. It's been really fun to talk with us. We haven't started planting anything yet. Not the tomatoes. Not the tomatoes. I sneaked in the back door with the peppers. We'll talk about those another time. They're already going. But the tomatoes will start in a couple, 3 weeks. So if you want to make sure that you've got yours, go check out our website and look at the list and get your order in if you're local.
Yeah, sounds good.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.